Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Shadowed City podcast. I am your host, Larry, and this is The Shadows Within. Here to go over quite a few shows, actually. We're going to start with IZW Beatdown. And by the way, IZW's new name is North Carolina Pro Wrestling NCPW under the GPW banner now. I want to throw that out there. For IZW Beatdown, when it was still IZW, Jeremy took on Jaquil, with Jaquil walking away victorious. The Dog, Rob Anderson versus Cold Steel. Cold Steel walking away victorious. Taryn Williams versus Rose Wilson versus Taylor Griffin in a triple threat, where Rose Wilson walked away victorious. Jack Graves versus Johnny Superkicks, with Jack Graves walking out victorious. The Red Wolves, John Robb and Big Lou, took on the King family, with the King family walking away victorious. Jen versus Angelina, with Jen walking away victorious. Rusty Steele versus Aaron James, with Rusty Steele walking away victorious. Fatal 5-Way, Crimson Heart won that Fatal 5-Way. Sonya Ortiz versus Kelly Bass in the main event, with Sonya Ortiz walking out victorious. IZW Thunder, when it was still under IZW Thunder, and apparently it's not going to be under the Thunder name, it's going to be Carnage now. IZW Lockdown Championship, no escape, of course. It's always held in a cage or Hell in a Cell match, or even Elimination Chamber. It was between Blade and the champion Akane, where Akane retained the gold. Sonya Ortiz versus Reagan Anderson versus Christina Palmer. Sonya walking in the champion as the IZW Women's Champion, and Sonya Ortiz defended it and retained. Red Wolves, Big Lou and Big T versus the Royal Geniuses, Combat Genius and KD, where the Red Wolves walked out victorious. Chaos King versus RFL, with RFL walking out victorious. Jack Graves versus Jaquil for the BMF Championship, with Jaquil walking in the champion, Jack Graves walking out the champion. The King family versus Muerte El Guapo and Sean Smith, with the King family walking out victorious. Dirty Diana versus Callie Bass versus Lady Blue, with Dirty Diana walking out victorious. The Savage John Robb versus AJ Woods, with John Robb walking out victorious. And in the main event, Ricky Otunga versus the Dog, Rob Anderson, with Ricky Otunga walking out victorious. Now, I am going to go over WWM Ascension. The One Championship, held under the One Rules, of course. Ace Green versus the champion Ranger Rogue, with Ranger Rogue retaining the gold. 10-man Royal Rumble, Alpha, Connor Holland, Kyle Burton, Dex Michaels, Spicy Smiley, Brian Bay, Jay Williams, Mr. Hot Sauce, Sean Smith, and Tyson Storm, where Jay Williams walked out victorious. GCW Intercontinental Championship, Makeo versus the champion Bobo the Clown, with Bobo the Clown retaining the gold. 4-way elimination, Kyrie Sparks versus Callie Rage versus Abby Small versus Akira, with Callie Rage walking out victorious. Trey Nolan versus Buster Anderson, with Buster Anderson walking out victorious. Tornado Tag, Jay La Basita and JDB versus the Skull Syndicate, Sam Skull and Jack Skull, with the Skull Syndicate walking out victorious. WWM International Championship, Big Tua versus the champion Jack Graves, with Jack Graves retaining the gold. GPW World Heavyweight Championship, defended in the main event, Blade versus Big Lou versus the champion Ronan Gage, with Blade walking out the new champion. WWM Ascension 2. Fatal 4-Way, Dirty Diana versus Wendy Rogue versus Callie Bass versus War Maiden, with Dirty Diana walking out victorious. WWM Television Championship Gauntlet Eliminator, Fatal 5-Way, Tony Rose versus Nels Wade versus El Guapo Sparks versus Jay La Basita versus On Rayo, with Nels Wade walking out victorious. And welcome Chris Graves, what it looks like. Welcome. HOH Cage, Demon versus the Savage John Robb, with John Robb walking out victorious. GCW Continental Championship, The Dog, Rob Anderson versus Ace Cannon, with Ace Cannon walking out victorious. 6-man tag, Raven Nightshade, Shadows Cage, and Mr. Hot Sauce versus Kando Dragon, Gage Payton, and Little Carnage, with Kando Dragon, Gage Payton, and Little Carnage walking out victorious. Inferno, Akane versus Carnage, with Carnage walking out victorious. Victor Blackthorn versus Tyson Storm, with Tyson Storm walking away victorious. The Tank versus Jay Williams, with The Tank walking out victorious. GPW Bruiserweight Championship 10-man Gauntlet Eliminator. Ari Verge versus the Phantom Eddie Walker versus Joshua Bacon versus Dex Michaels versus the Lost Lamb versus Cash Gordy versus Jaquil versus Muerte El Guapo versus Sebastian Storm versus X, with X walking out victorious. GPW Junior Impact Championship Ranger Lee versus the champion CJ Wade, with Ranger Lee walking out the new champion. And in the main event, the one championship held under the one rules, Ronan Gage versus the champion Ranger Rogue, with Ranger Rogue retaining the gold. Now for WCCW. Hannah Hannibal versus Sin Tavia C. Boulay, with Sin Tavia C. Boulay walking out victorious. Queen Scarlet Shields versus Nova Penny Graves, with Nova Penny Graves walking out victorious. Jeannie Jaw versus Maisha Wolf Platinum, with Jeannie Jaw walking out victorious. Extreme Rules, Stevie D'Angelo versus Giovanni, with Stevie D'Angelo walking out victorious. Eric Knight versus Baron Kromke, with Eric Knight versus Braun Kromke, with Braun Kromke walking out victorious. Callie Red versus Montana Red, with Callie Red walking out victorious. Tara Moss versus Lilith Carter, with Tara Moss walking out victorious. The Outsider versus Ali Nasir Muhammad, with Ali Nasir Muhammad walking out victorious. No Holds Barred, Leon B. Platinum versus Carl Cannon, with Leon B. Platinum walking out victorious. CJ Frost versus Justin Edward Lee, with Justin Edward Lee walking out victorious. Danny Marcella versus Dawn, with Dawn walking out victorious. Travis Turner versus the Monarch Calypso, with the Monarch Calypso walking out victorious in the main event. Now it is time for our next show, which will be EWS Lioness 3, Episode 3. Okay. Suex Z versus Kyra Hex, with Suex Z walking out victorious. Welcome Philip Thomas. Sisters of Destruction versus Delilah Hex and Delilah Hex. The Hex Sisters versus the Sisters of Destruction, with the Sisters of Destruction walking out victorious. Laura Little versus Lucy Kane, with Laura Little walking out victorious. Haven Callahan versus Jasmine, with Haven Callahan walking out victorious. LJ versus Tabitha Piper, with Tabitha Piper walking out victorious. Yeah. Red versus the Captain, with the Captain walking out victorious. Banshee versus Case Demoise, with Case Demoise walking out victorious. Paris Parks versus RFL, with RFL walking out victorious. Starlight versus Devi Chen, the champion. Starlight the champion against Devi Chen, defending the TV championship, with Devi Chen walking out the new champion. Now for All-Star Pro. All-Star Pro. Welcome B-More. Welcome of AOWE. Welcome, sir. All-Star Pro Grindhouse Season 4, Episode 6. Noah Dixon versus Granddaddy Handsome, with Granddaddy Handsome walking out victorious. Raven Grimes versus Jackie Harper, with Raven Grimes walking out victorious. Lanza Kazarian versus Traficante de Muerto, with Lanza Kazarian walking out victorious. Nisha versus RFL, with Nisha walking out victorious. J Stone Jones versus Chris Legend, with J Stone Jones walking out victorious. Kando Dragon versus Blackjack, with Kando Dragon walking out victorious. Champion versus Champion, Akane versus Frank Ortiz, with Frank Ortiz walking out, with Frank Ortiz walking out victorious. In the main event, Women's Tag Team Championships, Rock Stars versus the Dangerous Alliance, with the Dangerous Alliance walking out the champs. Now for All-Star Pro Season 4, Episode 10, Pal Driver. Don Wildside versus Crimson, with Crimson walking out victorious. Shin Joan versus Sonya Ortiz, with Sonya Ortiz walking out victorious. 2B Mad versus King and DeMarco, with King and DeMarco walking out victorious. Adam Matthews versus the Dog, Rob Anderson, with the Dog, Rob Anderson, walking out victorious. Cold Steel versus the Savage John Robb, with John Robb walking out victorious. The Ghost Jay Jin versus Lil Devil, with Jay Jin walking out victorious. Jesse Harper versus Sean Smith, with Jesse Harper walking out victorious. Reagan Anderson versus Cali Rage, with Reagan Anderson walking out victorious. Welcome, Trey. I hope you are well, brother. Big Lou versus Derek Sicario in the main event, with Derek Sicario walking out victorious. All-Star Pro Havoc Season 4, Episode 12, Trevor Fire versus Nagasaki, with Nagasaki walking out victorious. Rose Wilson versus Dirty Diana, with Rose Wilson walking out victorious. Turtle Harrington versus Jay Red, with Jay Red walking out victorious. Welcome, Fat Squirrel. Hope you are well, my brother. Jaquil versus Pedro Payne, with Jaquil walking out victorious. That's good to hear, Trey. Much love, brother. Sam Magnum versus Jack Graves, with Jack Graves walking out victorious. Red Reapers versus Dangerous Alliance, with Dangerous Alliance walking out victorious. Perry Hale versus Damian Briggs. Welcome, Susie. Yes, we do gotta see the new Spider-Man next month. I'm down for that. Should be awesome. Christine St. James versus Emma Rose, with Christine St. James walking out victorious. Buster Anderson versus Akane, with Akane walking out victorious. Welcome, Susie. Hope you're well. GEW Fight Club now. Fuck Cancer Tour number 2. Big Time. Oh, it was a mystery opponent versus Dimebag Dan. It turned out to be Big Time, and the Big Time versus Dimebag Dan. Dimebag Dan walked out victorious. Bunny Black versus Emily Wright, with Emily Wright walking out victorious. Sadistic Joker versus Mad King, with Mad King walking out victorious. Handicap Psycho versus Dynamite Daisy and Jules Wigginton, with Dynamite Daisy and Jules Wigginton walking out victorious. Britt Graves versus Amaya Thomas, with Britt Graves walking out victorious. Gremlin versus Jay Prince, with Jay Prince walking out victorious. Bloody Five, Kelly North versus Violet Death versus Akira versus Miss Gator Croc versus Victoria Ritchie, with Miss Gator Croc walking out victorious. Dispatcher versus Haley Ramone, the champion for the Fight Club Women's KO Championship, of Haley Ramone retaining the gold. Special guest referee Muffin Top John for the GW World Heavyweight Championship match between SGK and the champion Damian Briggs, with SGK walking out the new champion. GW Fight Club Midnight Callouts. Mystery opponent versus Dimebag Dan turned out to be Bubba, with Dimebag Dan walking out victorious. Monica Hernandez versus Roxy, with Monica Hernandez walking out victorious. Michael Hernandez versus Mecca the Street King, with Mecca the Street King walking out victorious. The Badass John Wigginton versus SGK, with John Wigginton walking out victorious. Winter Storm versus Violet Death was supposed to go down, but it got turned to Miss Gator Croc versus Violet Death, with Violet Death walking out victorious. Dimebag Dan versus Jay Smoke, with Jay Smoke walking out victorious. And in the main event, Mr. Great Jaquil versus Jaquil, with Mr. Great walking out victorious. ASW now. Dimebag Dan versus Todd Wilson versus Damian Briggs, with special guest referee Jackson Wright, with Damian Briggs walking out victorious. 2 out of 3 Cell. Garmar versus Jay Smoke, with Jay Smoke walking out victorious. 2 out of 3 Cell. Noah Butler versus Seven Winters, with Seven Winters walking out victorious. Women's No Man Land's Championship, No Man's Land Underground. 2 out of 3 Emily Wright versus the champion Tina Rose, with Tina Rose retaining the gold. Ooh, that had flavor. ASW Championship, Carmelo Justice versus the champion Mr. Cause, with the champion Mr. Cause retaining the gold. ASW United Nations Championship, 2 out of 3 Light Tubes and Tax, Oconee versus versus the champion Travis Turner, with Travis Turner retaining the gold. 2 out of 3 no weapons, Jackson Wright versus Damian Briggs, with Damian Briggs walking out victorious. ASW Queen of Queens Championship, Kylana Wilson versus the champion Jessie Justice, with Jessie Justice retaining the gold. ASW Cold Heart Championship, Miss D versus the champion Cyborg Jackie, with Miss D walking out the new champion. ASW World Heavyweight Championship, Big Lou versus the champion Michael Russell, with Big Lou walking out the new champion. Welcome, Joseph. ASW King of Kings Championship, the villain Todd Wilson versus the champion the badass John Wigginton, with John Wigginton retaining the gold. TXT intake now. Mixed Tag Part 1. TXT intake Mixed Tag Part 1. And this was a tournament. Sabin and Killian Bain versus Phoenix and the Savage John Robb, with the Phoenix and Savage John Robb advancing to the second round. Violet Death and Wallace versus Reagan Anderson and Kang, with Reagan Anderson and Kang walking to the second round. First Lady and Chris Shade versus Brittany Sparks and Primetime JoJo, with Primetime JoJo and Brittany Sparks advancing to the second round. Nikita Sakamoto and Michael Russell versus Taylor Griffin and Nagasaki, with Nagasaki and Taylor Griffin advancing to the second round. Phoenix and the Savage John Robb versus Reagan Anderson and Kang, with Reagan Anderson and Kang headed to the finals. Brittany Sparks and Primetime JoJo versus Taylor Griffin and Nagasaki, with Taylor Griffin and Nagasaki advancing to the final round. Reagan Anderson and Kang versus Taylor Griffin and Nagasaki, with Taylor Griffin and Nagasaki walking out victorious, capping off that show. Now for TXT Imperium. TXT Women's United States Championship, 2 out of 3 Extreme Rules. Paragon Jay Prince versus the champion Big Fran, with Jay Prince walking out the new champion. Michael Russell versus Judah Kane, with Judah Kane walking out victorious. Elimination Extreme Rules, BB Wade and Crystal CC Cooper versus Sylvia Knight and Reagan Anderson, with BB Wade and Crystal Cooper walking out victorious. E-Fed versus Mike Steele, with Mike Steele walking out victorious. 3-way elimination, Jaquil versus David Pope versus Casey Jeremy, with Casey Jeremy walking out victorious. 3-way elimination, Sky Carver versus Paige Sky Smith versus McKay Albright, with Sky Carver walking out victorious. 2 out of 3, Dimebag Dan versus the badass John Wigginton, with Dimebag Dan walking out victorious. TXT United States Championship, 2 out of 3 Extreme Rules, Lil Devil versus the champion Jay Smoke, with Lil Devil walking out the new champion. TXT Mixed Tag Part 2, Baby Bone Crusher by the way, this is a tournament. BBC Baby Bone Crusher and Johnny Spear versus Big Bertha and Marcus Watts, with Big Bertha and Marcus Watts advancing to the second round. Winter Storm and Jaquil versus Veronica LeBeau and Goose Montana, with Jaquil and Winter Storm advancing to the second round. AJ Michelle and Max Steel versus Rebel Pain and Teo Malenko, with Max Steel and AJ Michelle advancing to the second round. Cali Rage and Michael Hernandez versus Didi and Tyson Tonga, with Didi and Tyson Tonga advancing to the second round. Big Bertha and Marcus Watts versus Jaquil and Winter Storm, with Big Bertha and Marcus Watts advancing to the finals. Max Steel and AJ Michelle versus Didi and Tyson Tonga, with AJ Michelle and Max Steel advancing to the finals. Big Bertha and Marcus Watts versus AJ Michelle and Max Steel, with Marcus Watts and Big Bertha walking out victorious. Now for DSEW Southside. Harley Cameron and Willow Nightingale versus Ray West and Larissa West, with Ray West and Larissa West walking out victorious. Truth Magnum and Turbo Floyd versus Adrian Santana and Cesar Sexton, the Panty Droppers, with the Panty Droppers walking out victorious. Kim Duggan versus Nikki Blackheart, with Kim Duggan walking out victorious. Vec versus Jaquil, with Vec walking out victorious. Ricky Nelson and Sam Nelson versus Ralph Wolf West and Jasmine, with Sam Nelson and Ricky Nelson walking out victorious. The upcoming Burning Reckoning card. And there will be a mystery matchup between Sid Vicious and the Great Muta. 5-way tables elimination. Sylvia Knight versus Vampiro versus Rose West versus Gangrel versus Slender Man. Extreme Rules Art the Clown versus Big T. Falls Count Anywhere Panty Droppers versus Red Wolves. Falls Count Anywhere Dame Wayne versus Buster Anderson. Co-main event Blackheart Collective versus the Faces of Fear in a death match, and then in the main event, a death match to cap off the night, Azrael Hall versus Jack Graves. Welcome the mighty. Welcome. So that is what I have listed so far, ladies and gentlemen, what I have down. We'll be having a war room here in the future. Stay tuned for that. Also stay tuned for these shows that will be happening and going down. I just got word that TXT is happening right now. Go check them out. Going pretty good, brother. Not too bad, not too bad. I was just about to end this live. You got here right at the end. Just went over quite a few shows. Wow. 20 minutes in this live. Stay tuned for the next announcement of Breaking Kayfabe. I got something in the works for that. Stay tuned, everybody. Stay tuned. And next time I'm on here, I'm also going to go over upcoming pro wrestling shows. I haven't done that in a while, and I want to do that again. Stay tuned for that. Yeah. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a great day, good night, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever y'all may be. Peace out.